and welcome to the Nikhil Hogan Show. My guest today is pianist, improviser, and composer, Professor Noam Sivan. He is Professor of Piano Improvisation at the State University of Music and Performing Arts, Stuttgart, and we will talk about his exciting master's degree in classical piano improvisation that he has created. Professor Sivan, welcome to the Nikhil Hogan Show.
Hello, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Tell me about your background and how did you get started in music?
My mother was a piano teacher. So I started learning piano with my mother, and there were other students at home, and I went to the piano. And I remember even when I was something like 5 years old, I went to the piano and I started playing melodies. I tried to create melodies, and soon after that, my mother started giving me piano lessons. So that was my beginning, and I was playing and improvising. And later, of course, I had other teachers and other things, but this was the beginning.
And you said no one told you to improvise and compose; you just naturally did that.
I think that my mother encouraged it. And she liked when I did that. And I think when I was maybe 8 or 9, I would invite my family members and play my own little compositions at the piano, whatever I was composing. I don't even remember what it was. And I didn't write anything at that time. But yes, I was interested in creating music, and it seemed natural at the beginning. Only later, I learned that it's supposed to be unnatural.
That's the culture. Yeah, I would love to talk about the culture of music and classical music and improvisation. And so was your mother a classical piano teacher? So you played classical repertoire? So how did she have that very enlightened mindset to try improvisation and try being creative in that regard?
I don't remember I don't think she actually taught me to improvise, but I do remember that she encouraged me improvising, and she did teach me some basics of music theory, of ear training, which of course was very helpful. And I did hear from other students of hers that she was very encouraging for creativity. One of them, David Dolan, he said that she was very encouraging of creativity at the time when he studied with her. And another piano student of hers that is also older than mine and remembered many years later that she would give her an assignment to improvise with a few notes or to compose with a few notes. So I think she was encouraging, but I did learn to read music and I did learn the repertoire, and that was definitely the basis of my study with her.
Okay, so let me ask you about your university, your formal training.
My formal training. So I grew up in Haifa, Israel, and I went to a music program in my high school, which actually had an improvisation class, which was nice, and it was free improvisation, all the instruments together, very creative, very free, not so structured as some of the things I'm doing right now, but it gave a wonderful beginning, just to think that you could improvise. Then I did my undergraduate studies at Jerusalem Music Academy. I was a double major, piano and composition. I went to study at Manes College. I did my master's there, also piano and composition.
Okay. So if I could just jump in, Professor Sivan, because we're really speeding by. Let's jump to your undergraduate. And you said you double majored in piano and composition. So you were a natural composer. How did it change when you learned formal theory and you started taking formal composition lessons? Did all of that information complement, or were there some things you rejected, or you took it all in? Did you develop a personal style of composition? Because I know there are many different types of composition teachers who have different methods. So could you elaborate on that?
Okay. First, there is the problem of separation between composition and performance, which I encountered in the formal studies, that performers play repertoire and composers write music, and there is no improvisation, and there is no give and take between them. And when I learned that in music history, people did both, and there were composers and performers, and it was natural to do both activities, I was wondering, why isn't it like that today? And you have this separation. So that was one problem. But as a composer, I also had the question of what is the relationship between the music of today and the music of the past? Because when you learn in a composition program, you learn about counterpoint and harmony in musical styles from 200 years ago. And then when you compose your own music, you have to put all of it aside, and then you have to create musical language and musical grammar with very different materials. So I'm wondering, what is the relationship between them? And of course, I asked my teachers all of these questions, and the answers were that you learn a technique, and then if you can apply the technique in one language, then you can apply it in another language. But when the languages are very different, then how you apply it is not so simple.
Could you give an example of that?
An example. So if you learn counterpoint in Baroque style, you have two voices and you think how they relate to one another. And then you want to create, let's say, a melody that instead of doing G minor, goes... has very unusual intervals and it goes in different directions, the kind of counterpoint that you learned is not going to be applicable. And then there is a question, how do you create your harmonic language? So this was a question that I was thinking about a lot, and I was struggling with those kinds of questions as a composer. And it was only later that I clarified the approach that in the same way that you have different spoken languages, so you have English and German and Chinese and Russian and a lot of different languages, and each language has its own grammar. So you also have different musical languages, and each one has its own grammar, and you have to think how the chords and the notes relate to one another and how you create that grammar.
Did you solve that in your undergraduate, or was that later?
In my undergraduate, it was more intuitive, and this is really a gradual approach. And my way to deal with the intuitive composing was to set a deadline. I scheduled a concert. I put together a chamber ensemble or an orchestra, and then I composed the music, and I had to compose fast. So that I knew that I would compose the music and there would be not much time of just thinking and agonizing. So that was a very good experience to just schedule the concert, schedule the rehearsals, and then compose the music.
Can I ask you, did you have any pressure to be a modernist? So yes, you have to learn the older styles, you have to learn the tradition, but as a professional composer, did you feel that you had to, or the composition, the education you received was pushing you towards being a contemporary composer?
Well, this is an interesting question, and also compositionally, I enjoyed working in different directions and in different styles. So I was trying to create my own personal style, but I was also experimenting in different directions and borrowing from modern styles and borrowing from older styles. But what I could say is that if you submit your music to, to a composition residency, or you submit your music to a composition prize, or to a lot of panels and things like that, then there are certain things that are more legitimate than others, and certain things that are more trendy than others. And the things that are legitimate and trendy today are different from the things that were legitimate and trendy 50 or 60 years ago. But still, there are things that are considered part of what is new music, and there are things that are considered not so fashionable or not so much part of what is new music.
as you were about to graduate, did you know that you wanted to be a composer or you wanted to be a pianist or both? Or what was your dream at that point?
That question always remained an open question for me. And in a way, it still is. So there were times in my life that I called myself pianist and composer, and there were times that I called myself composer and pianist. And I remember I played the Bach-Goldberg Variations at a music festival, and the program listed me as composer and pianist. And then the critic at the newspaper, he wrote, "Oh, he played the Goldberg Variations, and it was such a good performance, but he's listed as composer and pianist." And he noted that this is how I was being presented. So I always enjoyed both, and I felt that both activities reinforce one another, and you learn. One gives information to the other. So I wanted to be a musician. It was clear to me that I was a musician and I am going to be a musician, and there was no question about choosing a different field. But what exactly to do in music was not so obvious. And when I finished my master's, my teachers didn't know what to do with me, because I was playing the piano, I was composing, I was also interested in music theory at that time, and I was doing my improvisation. And I asked them, what am I going to do? What is going to be my primary occupation? How am I going to make a living? What would be my next step? And nobody could give me a good answer. And I remember I felt very lonely as a result, because I knew that I wanted to make music, but it wasn't clear how to find the path. So today, when I'm in my 40s and not in my 20s, and now I am more established and I have my own direction and I have my own, I've done things and I have more experience. And now young people come to me who are at the age that I was when I finished my studies, and they come to me with their questions. So today it's easier for me to see things more clearly. But I can definitely remember that moment when I finished my master's studies, not so much undergraduate, because undergraduate, you know that you're going to continue and you do more. And I was studying in Israel, and then I went to New York. So you go to the big city and you learn from other influences. But then when you finish your master's and you think, okay, what's going to be the next step? Am I going to be a concert pianist? Am I going to be a composer? Am I going to be a university professor? Am I going to do this? Am I going to write film music? Am I going to write this? So many different questions of what to do, and it was not clear.
So your master's degree, what was your plan at that point? What were you going to major in? And you went to the Mannes School.
So I went to the Mannes School. My English was okay, but not great at that time. And I went to New York, and I arrived to New York 1 month before 9/11.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was my introduction. And then I was majoring in piano and composition, and I studied improvisation with Professor Carl Schachter, who was a big influence on me. I studied with him improvisation. I came to do piano and composition, and then in my entrance exam, they looked at my exercises in harmony and counterpoint, and then he asked me, "Do you improvise?" And I said, sometimes I do it for fun, but it's not something I'm taking very seriously, because obviously I was composing music for orchestra and for choir and for chamber ensembles and all of that, and I was playing the piano repertoire, and there was no overlap between the two activities. So he asked me, "Do you improvise?" And then he went to the piano and he played something like that. Something like 2 measures in classical style. And he asked me, "Can you continue that?" And then I started improvising. I don't even remember what I did, but I took that, I don't know, maybe like something like this. And probably not that, but I don't remember.
Something like that, yep.
But I was trying to think, okay, what would it be like if I had to compose, if I had to improvise in that style? And I just did something. And then he said, you know what, you should study improvisation. And then that led to me studying 2 years of classical improvisation, not just classical style, but Baroque, classical, romantic, tonal styles, studying improvisation.
Now he's a well-known Schenkerian, right? Were you aware of
Yes.
Schenkerian analysis by that point?
Yes, I was aware, and I studied some Schenker in Jerusalem. And then but when I went to Manes, I did not know that this is the place where you, the main place where you study Schenkerian analysis, and that was not the reason I went there. But definitely I was exposed to Schenkerian analysis, and definitely he is well known in that field. But in the way I see things, that's not the most important thing about him. And you see that I'm mentioning that I studied with him improvisation, and then there is a question between improvisation and analysis. So there is definitely an analytic side that is involved when you are creative. But what I learned from him was to really develop a deeper understanding of music and to set high standards, and then to bring all of that into the music that I'm improvising. So for me, this is...
Could you give an example of how he would have done that?
For example, I would play a piece and I would go to a high register, and I don't know, we were in F major now. So let's say I arrived to a high register, to a high note there, and then I play the second part of the piece, and then in the second part I only concentrate on the low register. He would say, you left that register hanging. So he would try to find connections between what happened in the first part and what happened in the second part, and to develop that kind of compositional thinking about how you relate to something that happened before and what happens to it later, which of course comes from an analytic approach, but then applying it to creating something on the spot, to improvising.
And all this time, you mentioned earlier that the two domains, performance, composition, they didn't quite overlap in any way. So there were separate areas. Did you find, you improvised as a child, but throughout your formal training, what were the perspectives on improvisation among your professors and your peers? What did they think of improvisation as you were growing up and in university in Manis and Jerusalem Academy?
There wasn't much of it going on. And if there was anything, it was something that you do as an experiment, or you might do this as an elective class just to open up your collaborative skills, improvise with someone else, but not something that people take as a serious activity, because the serious activities are composed music, the music that you think about and the music that you put on paper, and then you think about how to perform that music. So anything that you spend a lot of time doing and you perfect and you bring it to a level that it's well prepared. And I think this is one of the problems of our time, that we think that it has to be well prepared and well rehearsed, in the sense that you have to do the same thing and this is the finished product. But when you look at it from a perspective of an improviser, then you develop your craft and you prepare and you practice and you work on it and you spend years working on it and learning it, but then you also combine it with what happens in the moment and with creating music, which is a more natural way of music making. And for me, there is the language analogy, that when you learn a new language, it is not enough just to recite sentences that you learned previously and you read them from the text and you memorize them and this is what you say. You need to learn to speak the language. You need to learn creative writing. You need to learn to express yourself freely in that language. And that aspect of creativity is very important, and is also very important in music. And it was always important until recent times, when the separation between performance and composition developed, and the separation between serious music and popular music.
What about improvising cadenzas? So if you were taking piano performance, what would happen at the cadenza portion? Were you expected to memorize a written out cadenza from one of the composers?
I do remember that I composed some cadenzas to the Mozart concertos I was playing, and I played the Victor Ullmann piano concerto with the Philippine Philharmonic Orchestra in Manila, and I created my own cadenza for that concerto, and I did some cadenza composing, and I only learned about improvising cadenzas when I met Robert Levin, and then...
And when did you meet him?
I met him in 2003 for the first time. And actually, it was my teacher, Karl Schachter, who said, you have to go and meet him. He's improvising and he's doing it in classical style, and you have to meet him and you have to just be aware of what he's doing. And I visited him at Harvard University, and I played for him and improvised for him, and he gave me some good advice.
What did he say to your improvisation when you first met him?
He said that this is something that if you want it to be at a professional level, you have to take it seriously, and you have to spend the time to learn your craft, and whether you want it to be in this style or you want it to be in that style. And he also said something very interesting about originality of composers. I remember that he said that composers do not choose to be original, but what they do, they keep searching to find the best possible expression of what they do, and then the originality comes as a result of that deep search. And he gave me examples of some composers who, even after they reach what is known as their main style, or as their most recognizable style, they keep searching. And even sometimes they go in strange directions, but the fact that they do not just sit on their laurels and they say, "Oh, I'm now a good composer. I know how to compose music," and they just keep composing. And they, even when they reach the level when they have achieved something, they keep searching, because this is how you continue learning. And this is something that I think is important for every person in all areas of life, but for every musician, to keep searching and to keep developing, and not to just think, okay, this is what I can do today. That sounds great, wonderful. No, to keep searching and to keep developing to a higher level.
Can I ask you what things you worked on to take your improvisation to the next level? So Robert Levin told you that to take it seriously, you need to work at it. So what things did you work at? And you said you did 2 years studying improvisation with Karl Schachter. Could you tell my audience specifically, technically, the things that you were working on? Okay,
so now we're talking about a period of 20 years since my studies with Karl Schachter, from 2001 to 2003, and today, 2021. And I had to learn how to learn it. I had to learn how to learn improvisation, because there are not many methods out there for doing it. You have methods in jazz, very good methods, and later I learned about some of the resources from the Baroque era that have survived, but really very little. And what I had to do is to develop my own practice methods. And at first, what the studies with Schachter were important, because they gave me the confidence to just do it in concert. So I started doing it in my own performances, and then I started teaching it, and which was also very good, because that gave me a valuable experience in clarifying my thought process. And then I did my own doctorate writing on improvisation when I was at Juilliard. And then I got to meet improvisers from other countries, and I went to Europe, and I met other improvisers, improvisation teachers, and I started teaching it some more at Juilliard and Curtis, and all of those things were very good experiences. I did it more in concerts, longer improvisations, 4-movement sonatas, completely improvised recitals, improvising with actors, with dancers, a lot of different things. But if you ask specifically about developing the method of practicing, and if I can summarize it in a few words, what I would say, number one, you have to know your own abilities, and you need to know what you can do well right now and where you want to be tomorrow before you think where you want to be in several months, in several years. And creating exercises that develop particular skills, particular areas, whether it is in this style or that style, melody, harmony, texture, working with one hand, working with short musical segments, taking examples from the repertoire and improvising on them, taking chord exercises, working with textures, wild textures in free improvisation, lots of different things, but to create something where you can measure your progress and where you can think before you play, ideally, so that the pace of the music is not faster than what you can accomplish.
Can I ask what your operating system is in your brain when you're improvising and we're working on your method? So first, for instance, there's a resurgence in thorough bass for people who are interested in J.S. Bach's method. There's a resurgence in partimento for the Italian 18th century. Did you have something like figured bass, or were you using Schenkerian analysis or Roman numerals? What was your operating system?
Okay, between the methods that you mentioned, I find figured bass very helpful, because then you work from the bass and then you can create lots of things on top of it. So, for example, if we take, we take that progression, yeah? So we could do this in a lot of different. We can open up this progression in a lot of different ways. We could maybe do a nocturne. For example, we can do that, and it could...
How did you get the right hand? So what was that informed by the figured bass harmony?
Well, you know something, I just released a series of lessons on the website Tone Bass, 6 lessons in improvisation, just released to the internet just now, today or 2 days ago. And when I discussed romantic style, I talked there about how the right hand can elaborate the left hand. So when you take one chord, for example, this first chord, and you think, okay, which notes belong to the harmony? Then you can have the notes that are passing. You can have accented appoggiaturas. You can have chromatic one. And lots of other things. So you learn how there are various levels of elaborating an individual harmony. And whether you learn various tonal styles, Baroque or classical or romantic, and you want to learn how melody and harmony relate to one another, that's the first thing you should do. Think about the various levels of elaboration. And then when you can do this with one chord, you can do it with a chord progression.
Now, I wanted to ask you about voice leading. So how do you make sure that your right hand is not creating, for instance, hidden parallels, hidden fifths, as you've got the harmony going in your left hand?
The simple answer is not to play faster than your ability to think about it. So at first you simplify. And like I said, if you want to do this, you want to have that progression. And let's say I just want to practice two voices. For example, I do that. So you play slowly and you think, and then if it moves too fast, and you end up playing that, then you say, oh, I played too fast because I couldn't predict the next note. So I wasn't ready to play the next interval. So, sorry. For example, you can do that. And when you play more elaborate textures, so when you get to more elaborate textures, people listen to this and they think, oh, you just create it instantly. Well, this is the result of developing the ability to connect between melody and harmony over a long period of time until you get to the freedom where you can experiment with how the interplay between the two hands gets to a higher level of complexity. But yes, you wanted to ask about the figure bass.
Yeah, you said figured bass is a system that you think is quite good. What is a good way to get started with figured bass or basso continuo or thorough bass?
To work with existing bass lines. But if you remember, I just said you can start even by working with a single chord, with a tonic harmony. And right now I was doing it in romantic style. You can do this in other tonal styles, but you work with one harmony and you learn to connect the melody to the harmony. And you can just play one chord in the left hand with a fermata on it without moving to other places until you really feel comfortable how the right hand can elaborate it. And then you start with then you move on to short progressions, 3 notes, 4 notes in the left hand, or various bass lines that move from tonic to dominant through several other notes. You can take them from the repertoire, you can take them from existing, you mentioned partimento, existing exercises, and then how you work with them, you can work with them in 4/4, in 3/4, in 6/8, in 12/8, in a slow tempo, in a moderate tempo, again, depending on what you can do at that moment. Of course, you have to start with a slower tempo at the beginning so that you learn how melody and harmony relate to one another.
Now, you used the word harmony. Somebody would say, this all sounds great. Do I have to study a lot of harmony to do all of this? So would I need to take a modern theory textbook and learn and study it? So would I need to learn Roman numerals, function theory, later types of analysis. What's your take on the way music theory is taught, and is it applicable to what you're doing? And you mentioned that you studied analysis quite a bit before, and what's your take on that?
Music theory is important because it teaches you to think about how music is put together and how you connect the various dots, and it gives you terminology to talk about those things with other people. Now, in terms of what exactly you learn and how much you learn and how you apply it, of course, there is a wide spectrum. What I would say is that I would like to see in music theory more improvisation as part of the learning process, so that you're not only learning to analyze existing objects, but you also learn to use that and to improvise and to compose and to be creative with that material. Now, you asked about Roman numerals. I think that it is okay to be familiar with them, but not to take them to an extreme of analyzing every individual chord with a Roman numeral, but more to think about the basic functions. You have tonic, dominant, subdominant. Then, okay, you learn what is a mediant, and then you know about some of those things. But I prefer to think about scale degrees and about figured bass, because with scale degrees, even in the bass, when you have the leading tone, or you have sharp 4 that leads to the dominant, or you have flat 6 in a major key, or you have flat 2, which is the Neapolitan. So those are, this is not in the bass, of course, flat 2 in the Neapolitan, mostly in first inversion. So yes, of course, it is useful and helpful to learn about those things, about the harmonic functions, but you have to combine it with a creative approach, and it is also illuminating and refreshing to learn how people learned to compose and improvise at the time when those musical styles were created, if we're talking about tonal styles. Later, we can also talk about more contemporary styles.
Yes, I was just going to get to that, because you had quite a famous list of teachers. One of them, Milton Babbitt, is a well-known modern composer. And
yes.
Now, can you tell me, what did you study with him, and your relationship with him, and what you got out of your studies with him?
Milton Babbitt was a brilliant musician, and I had the opportunity to study with him when I was studying for my doctorate at Juilliard, when I was studying composition.
And what was your doctorate about? You mentioned, was it improvisation as well?
Yeah. So I was studying composition with Milton Babbitt, and then when I chose my topic for research, I chose improvisation for the research dissertation. So I studied with Milton Babbitt, whose musical style was different from mine. And I even remember I composed my piano concerto and performed it, and then I played the recording for another composer, and she said, this is very interesting, because I can never tell by the music if someone is a student of Babbitt or not, because his students sound so different from one another. And she said she meant it as a real compliment, because he was not enforcing his own musical style on his students. What I would say that the most important thing that that I learned from him and that he exemplified in his personality was extreme musical honesty. You could see that everything that he did in his composing and in his teaching came from just a place of really exploring music in the purest way, and not trying to just be not trying to be famous, not trying just to write complex music because it's fashionable to be complex, not just trying to do any of those things, simply composing the music that he wanted to hear. And he really wanted to hear those very specific intervals that he composed. And of course, his music is extremely challenging, but you can get that sense of honesty and sincerity in his approach. And he gave me a lot of confidence to continue and pursue my own way. And even the tonal pieces that I was composing, the pieces that were in earlier styles, he had a lot of positive feedback about those. And he said that he found a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of rich content. And he said, don't think too much about what other people say. You just have to continue and finding your own path. So
was Juilliard pro improvisation? Did it have a good culture there, and you felt like, okay, improvisation in classical music, I'm not facing any kind of pushback, everyone is supportive?
Well, later I taught at Juilliard. I was and when I started teaching at Juilliard, they wanted me to teach improvisation. And we created an improvisation program with the chamber music program, where groups could study improvisation in chamber music. And we did improvisation for the pianist, and we did improvisation for the historical performance program. I taught it on a 415 harpsichord for the historical program. And we did lots of those different things. So that was very valuable experience teaching it to a lot of different students.
And how did the students, was it completely new to them?
Yes. In all the places in the East Coast, when I was teaching improvisation at Juilliard and Mannes and Curtis, when I started, it was the first time when there was improvisation. And later, other things have evolved. But when I started in the first decade of the 20th century, first into the second decade, so it was the first time that improvisation was taught for classical musicians and coming from a classical that is non-jazz perspective. And from of course, I bring the compositional approach, because improvisation, we mentioned improvisation in historical styles, but when you bring improvisation to 20th and 21st century styles, then the relationship between composition and improvisation becomes very interesting, because then you can start combining between the spontaneity and the structure.
I can't help it. I have one more question about Milton Babbitt. You said he had some nice things to say and good feedback. What did he think of improvisation and what you were doing? If you could just flesh out a little bit more, I'm still curious about his perspective on that, because he's a well-known modernist composer, and you said he's very eclectic, which is very interesting.
What I remember is that we did not talk about improvisation so much, and I brought to him written pieces to the lesson. So I brought to him written scores, and he would look at the scores and he would, in an instant, find the most interesting thing there and have an insightful comment about it. His reading was very, very good. So we didn't really talk much about improvisation, but from what I remember, he regarded it as a skill that is useful for a composer because it helps you to develop ideas. But we didn't talk about it much.
Could you, and also one more question about just a cultural thing, which is, can you relate some interesting anecdotes of maybe famous, because you've been on the East Coast and in the US, and you've probably met so many famous musicians as well. Do you have any interesting anecdotes of people commenting on your improvisations? Because you're a pioneer of this, and now we kind of take for granted that, oh yeah, I can just learn Parlamento, I can just learn thorough bass, and it's normal now, everyone's starting to do it. But at that time, it was very primordial, it was very fresh, very new, and it's very interesting to see how it was starting to take root.
Yeah, I remember lots of encouraging feedback. I went to Toronto, and the composer Michael Colgrass invited me to give a concert, and he wanted me to improvise. And then I took some notes from the audience, and they gave me something like that. Do, re, mi, re, do. Yeah. And then I thought to myself, okay, what could I do with it? Just very, very basic. But then I thought, well, the material is so basic. and I can just build on it more and more. And I started doing lots of things, and it turned out to be a very long improvisation. And he was so excited afterwards. Michael Kilglass, and then he sent me his own scores, and it developed into some nice correspondence. He was then already past 80 at that time, but and he died a few years ago. But I remember lots of interesting conversations about the meaning of improvisation.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, but and you don't have to mention if there was, but there, I mean, it is rare in the start of the 2000s and even before that. And maybe earlier it was even hostile towards improvisation. But now, things are opening up. People are being more open to it. But did you have any negative feedback to improvisation? People telling you really shouldn't do this. It's not serious. And you don't have to mention people or anything, but just have you had some pushback to it? Because you were a pioneer of this.
Without mentioning names, I can say several things. One was that I did a lot of improvising when I took material from existing pieces and improvising with this material, which today I do less of. I improvise more just starting from scratch, but I did a lot of that. And one response I received was that, the composers, they worked hard to put this music on paper, and then you take this material and you change it, it somehow violates the integrity of the finished composition. And so that was one criticism I remember. And another came from another direction where you have musicians who have been playing their instruments for many years and playing repertoire and teaching repertoire and doing it for a long time, and then suddenly someone comes and says, listen, we should improvise because it's important and we need to be creative. And then they ask, why do we need this improvisation? We didn't need it before. We've had our own music. We had the repertoire, such rich repertoire. We can play this repertoire. We can teach. There is so much to do, so much to play, so much to learn. Why do we need to start improvising all of a sudden? So there was this approach also, but I try not to dig too much into those kinds of criticisms. Of course, if I'm in a conversation, I can respond to it. The importance of creativity, the importance of personal expression, the importance of connecting between the music we create and the music we learn, the language analogy. I know that it is important, and a lot of people today recognize its importance, but I can understand that people who have lived their entire lives in music without improvisation, and then comes someone young and coming with new ideas, at first they may look at it and say, I'm not sure why it's relevant or why it needs to be important.
You talked about the separation between performer and composer. As a composer and a performer, do you feel that being a composer, being an improviser, gives you an insight into performance that perhaps someone who doesn't improvise, doesn't compose? Does that composer's insight help your interpretation in a way that, for instance, dissonances and appoggiaturas and just giving maybe less of an academic approach to performance, making less equality in your performance, taking more notice of these things that maybe being a composer gives you a more nuanced insight?
Well, what I can tell you some of the feedback that I received from students who were improvising in concert for the first time, and students who have been in music their whole lives, in classical music their whole life, playing written repertoire, and saying, I've never felt so good playing in concert before. This was such a liberating experience. Now I go back to my repertoire and I find new things. I can understand what the composer was thinking about when writing this music. I can now understand the decision-making, the choices. I can now bring another dimension to my interpretation. A lot of feedback that students give me that tells me, yes, this gives something that is hard to receive otherwise. Not saying that you cannot be a wonderful musician without improvising. But I do think that if you improvise, then it adds another dimension, and then you bring that to playing repertoire. It gives you a new perspective.
And this is a non-improvisation question. This is actually an interpretation question. There has been some criticism about competition playing, and I interviewed Cyprian Katsaris, and he talked about academic playing, which he didn't like. And so maybe nowadays people are having a really personalized, everyone is trying to be a bit more personalized in the way they look at repertoire, not more like a streamlined competition style way of performance. Do you have any comment on that, just on interpretation?
This is not only competitions, but it started with recordings. So when you have recordings, then you expect a live performance to be as perfect as the recording. And that means that people have to be more cautious and to take fewer risks and to practice the same repertoire for longer, just to bring it to a level of perfection that was not expected earlier. So we have recordings which promote that kind of perfection, and then you have competitions which promote that kind of perfection, because in order to get accepted into an international competition, you have to be at an extremely high technical level, not to mention to pass the first round and to get to the finals and to win the competition. So all of that, while it has value of trying to get to a higher level, and you want to perfect your technique, and the technique allows you to do important things, there is a lot of emphasis placed on that, and not enough emphasis placed on how do you develop your artistic personality. So artistic personality is very important, and what you see with high-level teaching situations, when you have students who are already at the level of competition winners, and they come to their professors at renowned or prestigious music schools, and then the professors say, well, you have to be at a very high level. But then when they get to the high level, they say, well, now you need to develop your artistic personality. But what happened before? How did you develop your personality? And again, I think that if you also learn to improvise, that helps with developing it. And you can start doing it even when you start playing an instrument as a child. And then, in my opinion, you have to learn both. You have to learn to play repertoire, and you have to learn to improvise, and then one needs to help the other.
Now let's talk about contemporary improvisation. At what point do you see the break in common practice improvisation? So figured bass, historically, we can say it works for the 17th, 18th, maybe even the 19th century, and maybe even early 20th century, the French tradition. But at what point do you feel like you have to change your system a little bit to accommodate later styles, modal playing, and that sort of thing?
There is a lot of overlap, of course. But when we discuss, when we talk about modal playing, so when you do modal playing, then you think then the harmonic language is different, and you can use dissonances and consonants in different ways. And
that's a good. So do you still have that framework? Consonances, dissonances. Is it about unresolved, unprepared dissonances? Do you think in that way, or do you have a completely different way of thinking?
Okay, I can give you an example. If we are here, sorry. If we're here, this is the Lydian mode, right? Has sharp 4. Yeah. So the notes that I'm using belong to the Lydian mode. And then if I want to move to something else, then I move to a different harmony, which is also modal, but then instead of a chord, we move into a mode. Now, if I make it even more chromatic, you see that there are already more diminished intervals. Here there is a diminished tetrachord. And then the harmonic language becomes more chromatic than the modal stuff that I had just a second ago. For example. So the harmonic language becomes even more chromatic and the intervals are different. A lot of other things.
What is anchoring that piece? So do you think in terms of a key, a mode? You say chromatic, so chromatic as relates to what? The key or the underlying, the progression?
The chromatic is that you use more notes than just notes that belong to a particular key or particular mode. And of course, potentially you can use all of them. Yeah, you can use, but if you use all of them at once, then it is hard to create a context. But if you use some of them, for example, if I use and then I introduce another one. And then another one. For example, just as this opening, it sets an atmosphere and you start listening to the repetition, the pattern repetition, and the new material, and then there is something new that happens, and then there is continuity.
Are you thinking of intervals, Professor Sivan?
Well, in a way, yes, but sometimes the music moves too fast for me to verbalize what intervals are being used. But I'm thinking about material that repeats and material that continues and develops.
Let's say you have some fluency in an older style of improvisation. What shall you do to broaden into a later, more contemporary style? What advice can you give?
So this is also one of the lessons I was just doing for tone bass. And there was one specifically on that style, which I called free chromaticism. And also I was now teaching this past semester in Stuttgart, a class on free improvisation. So there are different things you can do. If I can summarize it briefly, you can first start with a simple ostinato pattern, something that repeats, and then you think about how to develop melodic material on top of that with variety of notes and variety of intervals, so that you use different things and you get first you have to get past the reliance on tonal harmony, because if you start playing triads, then it limits your possibilities. So thinking about opening up intervals, notes, and then to shape a melodic line. And contact with repertoire is always important, not only in historical styles. I don't know if we mentioned it before, but it is so important when you learn improvisation, contact with repertoire, but also with contemporary music. The composers that you like, the pieces that you like, you listen and you think, how do I want to be inspired by that? How do I learn from it? So that's another thing. But in terms of the actual improvisation practice, you can start with melody and accompaniment. In that style with ostinato accompaniment, for example, like what I did. And you add one note or two. And the notes that I added are different from the notes that are in the accompaniment. And that's the beginning. Or another accompaniment. So accompaniment and material that grows on top of it. Think about the atmosphere that you create. Is it a scherzo? Is it a mysterious piece? Is it lyrical? Is it scary? Is it dramatic? You can think about the textures. Do you want to have chords? Do you want to use sound? Do you want to use the inside of the piano? To use, muted strings. So you can expand in terms of sound. There are so many starting points. And then the question, after you have a good start, the question is, how do you continue the music material so that it's not just, hodgepodge, just throw everything in, but you start with something and then you have the continuation needs to be related. And that's also important. You ask the musical material, where do you want to go?
Some people would say the 20th century, there's a good book, Vincent Persichetti's 20th Century Harmony. Would you say that's one way also to gain some material for modern contemporary improvisation, something like that?
Okay, there are some nice things about that book. One of them is that he presents a lot of possibilities, a lot of starting points. And another is that he has a very long list of reference pieces that you can look at and you can listen to those pieces. Now, in that book, he's not tying the different threads together. He presents, this is one possibility, this is another possibility, another possibility, another possibility, which is great. And then you can start there. But then you can... then you need to continue on your own with really, like I said, asking the music where it wants to go, listening to repertoire, reading repertoire, playing repertoire, and of course, you can be in contact with other musicians, with other composers. You can read what other people say about their compositional process. There are so many ways you can learn creativity. But I agree with you that in terms of improvisation, there is less than composition, or less structured, or less, less pedagogical material, because many people who improvise, they work intuitively. And this is very good just to listen to how their improvisations flow, and they are spontaneous. But then in terms of learning how it can be in a more structured way. So this is something that sometimes you have to find on your own, or you have to connect the different threads together.
Let me ask you this question, which is, I think there is a trend and an urge and an urgency, and younger people are very interested in improvisation, and it's starting to penetrate music education, and it's starting to see a resurgence around the world. Now, if you are an educator and you're teaching improvisation, how do you grade it in the same way that a piano performance educator would grade an interpretation? Because I'm sure you've seen improvisations you don't like. So how do you make sure that this is a good improvisation as a teacher? This is a good improvisation. This is something I don't think is good. And because, being subjective, that can be so broad to the point where you don't understand me. This is my improvisation, and you might not like it, but to me it's an A, it's an A grade. So how do you grade improvisation?
The emphasis is not so much on the grading, but on the learning process. And you will actually be surprised that very often when I give feedback where the student could develop in a certain direction, they themselves already thought about it. So I noticed that musicians and music students, they have very good ears, and sometimes this creates a problem because their ears are very good, but then their technical skills or their improvisation skills are not yet at the level of what they can hear. And then they get frustrated that what they improvise is not yet what they would like it to be. But they hear what needs to improve. And if they don't, then I ask them these questions, and then I ask them leading questions. What do you think about this part that you played? What do you think about what happened here? Where could you develop here? And then that gets them thinking, and then they say, oh, I want to develop this. And when they want to develop in a certain direction, then the teacher's role is to help them find how to develop, and then I can give them tools. But we don't start with giving them tools before they are ready for it, before they are ready to absorb the tools. Now, in terms of evaluating the improvisation, I would say I want to think about it in the same way that I think about composed music, in the sense of if the music develops, if there is a wide emotional spectrum. For example, if you play something and I don't know, let's say I play and I repeat, then I could say, well, it's nice, but we can explore a wider spectrum. What can you do to expand? You can expand, add new elements. You can expand, the harmony. You can expand the texture. You can expand it. You can expand the register. So many ways to expand, or you can open up and think what are the possibilities, and have a wider expressive range. If I can mention it, if I can say it in words, a wider expressive range. And when I teach my ensemble, I have an improvisation ensemble here in Stuttgart where we have musicians and poets and actors and a lot of people together, not only in music, but interdisciplinary. And one of the things that I tell them a lot is that how can we widen the expressive range? How can we explore more emotions and more possibilities? Because when you learn to explore your extremes, then later you can curb them. But first you have to open up. And with students, it's particularly important to open up and to explore more and to realize that there is so much that you can express in music, just so many things that you can express. And then that's how you build your artistic personality.
Tell me about the master's degree program at the University of Stuttgart. How has the reception been? And you said you've been developing it for quite a while. And how is it going?
So what is interesting is that the Music University in Stuttgart, they developed the idea for it without me first. They were thinking about it for many years, and they wanted to create a specialized master's in improvisation. And I was thinking about this back when I was in the United States, when I was teaching in New York and Philadelphia, and I developed my own improvisation classes, and I mentioned some of the things that we were doing. Also, I mentioned Juilliard. Also, at the Curtis Institute, we were doing lots of interesting things with students improvising so many different instruments. And anyway, so I was thinking, yes, we need to create a master's program. So I wanted to create a master's program, and then Stuttgart wanted to create a master's program, and then they just found me and they called me and they said, we have an opening. There are other people applying, but we also want you to apply. And I applied for the program, and this was how I started here. And I think they realized that in music education, we need to expand and to open up possibilities for improvisation. And now I'm very happy that we managed to open this program. It's one of the first of its kind worldwide, improvisation that is offered for classically trained pianists. And we explore improvisation in different styles, from Baroque to contemporary. And students who are doing the master's program, they not only improvise solo, but they also have to create a chamber group and improvise with it, and to do interdisciplinary performance. And they need to get some teaching experience themselves, so that when they finish the program, they will be ambassadors of improvisation, because we need ambassadors. We need people who are going to improvise and do it in concert and do it in collaboration and teach it and talk about it with other people. We need to change the culture. In order for this to happen, we need more and more people. So
can you tell me about the reception? How's it going, and how are the students liking the program?
Well, we really only started, this is really brand new. The program only opened in October 2020. So it's really brand new, and so far I'm getting interesting interesting emails from around the world, from New Zealand to California to Moscow to South America, and people say, "Oh, I'm interested in improvisation, and can you tell me more about it? I want to apply for the program." So I now start getting those emails from people who are interested in improvisation, and they say, "Oh, this was necessary. We waited for it for a long time for something like this to happen." The students, they love it. The students, they recognize that there is an opportunity here to go into a new territory and to explore improvisation in a new setting. And also, it's interesting that the people who are interested in classical improvisation, they come from different backgrounds. Some are classical pianists, some are composers, some have experience improvising in jazz or in more or in different styles, and they want to learn more about the classics. So the program invites people from different backgrounds, and then they come and they specialize in the kind of improvisation that I am teaching, so that they can emerge and later advocate for improvisation out there in the world.
Since it's a master's program, do you ask that they come in with a little bit of experience in improvisation, or it's okay, you don't need any experience, you can start at the beginning?
This is a master's program, so I want to see people who already have some experience and some skills, and there is an entrance audition, and they have to do certain tasks.
What do they have to do at the audition?
They have to improvise one tonal piece, and one piece in freestyle, and one piece using modes, and one piece in their own style. They have to improvise in various different paths, various different directions. Also, they have to play some repertoire, not a lot, but maybe one or two pieces, just to show that they can also play repertoire. And I want to see how they develop material, how they control the harmony, how they show pianistic resources. And so that's about the master's program. But then there are people who are not doing the master's, and they want to learn improvisation in the bachelor program. So I'm also teaching some improvisation for for people who are not majoring in it. So there are different possibilities in that regard. But for the master's program, it's for people who are serious about it and want this to be a central part of their musical personality, a central part of their musical activities.
How is the culture around classical improvisation different today than perhaps when you started?
The culture has changed, and we mentioned a couple of people who helped make it change. We mentioned Robert Levin. We can mention Rudolf Lutz, who opened the improvisation program at the Schola Cantorum in Basel, Baroque improvisation. We can mention John Mortensen, who created a wonderful online community of improvisers.
Right, Improv Planet.
That's right. We mentioned David Delan, who created a Center of Improvisation at the Guildhall School in London. We can mention Karst de Jong, who helped
he came to Singapore.
Yes, that's right. He helped create collaborations between different improvisers across Europe, and because it's important for improvisers to know each other. And I know that all of these people appeared on your show.
Yes.
So
fantastic, all of them.
And of course there are many others. And so the culture is changing, and people are interested in improvisation, and there are groups who improvise. Here in Germany, I gave a workshop to the Stegreif Orchestra. It's an orchestra which is made of classical musicians who want to improvise. And actually, the name of the orchestra is the Improvising Symphony Orchestra, and in German they call it Stegreif, but which means improvised. So they take classical repertoire and they improvise with it, and they invited me, and we think about how can classical musicians improvise more and incorporate it not only into solo playing, but also into chamber and orchestral playing. So definitely there are welcome changes in the culture, but there is a lot more that needs to be done in terms of making improvisation an integral part of our musical culture. And that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. So you asked me about how improvisation relates to the other activities. I still compose, and I still compose music for chamber forces, and I composed an oratorio in Hebrew and Arabic a while ago, and I composed for orchestra, and I still play the repertoire, and I love the repertoire, and I still do all of those other things, going back to the question of what I wanted to do when I was young and how to find a place for all of them. But I realized that improvisation is needed. And what I do with improvisation is necessary in order for it to have a more central place. And that's why I need to do improvisation in my recitals. That's why I needed to release the album Ambiro's Journey, which is more than 70 minutes of improvised piano music, and related
that's your solo album, Ambiro's Journey, yes. The first ever piano improvisation studio album with more than 70 minutes of continuous music and a single unedited take.
Yes, a single unedited take, and the music relates to a sense of a journey of the main character. Part of it is internal, part of it is external, so there is a framing story, but the music is improvised. And it was important to do that so that people know that it's possible. And so all of those activities, and it was important for me to create this improvisation ensemble when people from different disciplines can improvise and collaborate. And all of those different activities, I feel that this is the role that I took on myself in order to really help improvisation be a more integral part of our musical culture.
You're a piano performer. Nowadays, if let's say someone were to give a recital, a professional concert performer were to give a piano recital, what's the ratio between composed music, improvised music, and repertoire, in your opinion? What's an ideal ratio there?
There are a lot of different ways in which you can create a program, and you can play written pieces and you can improvise transitions between them. You can have the first half written repertoire and the second half improvised. You can do an all improv recital, as some of the concerts I'm doing, in which the first half, the improvisations, are in specific recognized styles, and the second half is free improvisation, which can relate to dramatic aspects and to poetry or collaborations. Or you can do so many different things. I think the important thing is that you start with an idea. You ask yourself, what is the concert about? What is the musical message? What is the artistic message? What do you want to share with your audiences? You start with that approach, and then how much improvisation depends on that. I can give you another example. I'm now collaborating with an opera singer, with a soprano, and we are doing a project which explores the roots of human hubris, which leads to unfortunate violence between different groups of people. And we have texts and we have music, and we think, how much needs to be improvised? Can we improvise on this text, or do we need to actually take a written piece? So we start with the ideas, and then the improvisation comes as a result of that. So I think if you ask about the ideal ratio in a public performance, it is not so much that there is one recipe, but it is more about what is the artistic message, what is the musical message, and then improvisation is a tool that helps you to deliver the message. So yes, creativity is important. Yes, when you improvise in concert, it is a unique experience for the listener because they experience live music making in the true sense of the word. But it is not just about improvisation per se, just because you can improvise, but what is the artistic message or the personal message that you are going to deliver, whether it is as a musical or an extra musical message.
From your solo piano recitals where you have improvised, tell me a memorable one that you've, in one of your improvised solo piano recitals.
Improvised solo piano recitals. I have enjoyed the challenge of doing 4-movement sonatas. When I've done that, when you take one theme from the audience and then you have to relate all 4 movements to that one theme. And I've done it a couple of times in different countries, in different places. I always enjoyed doing that. It almost felt like playing a sonata from the repertoire, where you have the first movement, then you have the slow movement, and the slow movement ends, and then, oh wow, now you have the scherzo coming, and you still have the same theme that you remember from the beginning and the finale, and it is long and rich in detail. Of course, it takes a lot of preparation, but this is something I enjoyed a lot. But you know something, I want to mention a different kind of experience.
Yes, please.
When I was living in New York, I was teaching improvisation, and then my friend and colleague Charlie Neidig, the clarinetist, he called me up and he said, "Listen, can you teach my class? I have to go. I have to travel. Can you take my students?" And he had a class of wind players, clarinetists, and flute players, and saxophone players, and different wind instruments. And then I entered the room, and you have students who are, I don't know, maybe 12, 15 of them, and they never improvised before. And he said, "Do with them whatever you want." And I entered the room, and without a single word, we start improvising. I just tell them, okay, sit down, take your instruments, we start improvising, and I play at the piano, and I conduct them as they improvise, and oh, you play more solo, oh, here, more accompaniment, oh, listen to him. All of this with sign language, with hand movement, without a single word, and then we improvised for over an hour together, non-stop, and it was such a wonderful experience to improvise like that with the students whom I did not know before, but just creating that connection through music. And it's the same thing when I improvise with professional colleagues, but to just enter the room and you have people that you don't know, and you start getting to know the other person or a group of people just through music, through making music together. This is really, when you say what is memorable, this is memorable, to make music without words.
Up to this point, what has been your proudest musical moment?
Very good question. Very good question. In terms of a compositional achievement, I will mention, this is maybe a conventional answer, but I mentioned that I wrote an oratorio in Hebrew and Arabic, which is called Death and Birth, and it was my longest composition, 45 minutes, and it was a big challenge to compose in Arabic, a language that I do not speak, and I collected a lot of sources of text on prayer and death and funeral and birth and infertility and pregnancy and a lot of things that relate to those two milestones in our universal life journey. So just in terms of a creative project, working on a creative project, that was really something that I was very happy with. But if you ask about proudest moment, I would say the things that I'm most proud of are the things that happen in my own practice room, and not necessarily also the public performances. Yeah, this is great, and all of that. But the things that you accomplish something and you overcome a difficulty, you overcome a challenge, and if something is difficult for you and you manage to solve that problem. So when we talk about improvisation, about genres that are difficult to improvise, fugue improvisation, or anything that requires really to find how you do that. Or I remember when I was trying to penetrate to understand how to improvise in the style of Debussy fast music, which is not obvious, and was one of the numbers in Ambiro's journey was an homage to Debussy. And I asked this question, and it wasn't. I didn't get easy answers. And then I have to ask this question. Then I have a diary, and I take notes every day. I practice. I think about it some more. I write some more. I do a lot of writing. If you ask about tips for people, do a lot of journal writing, documenting your progress. And so this is, so I would say whenever I manage to overcome a personal difficulty, I celebrate that success.
How are you different as an improviser today versus 10 years ago? And where do you see yourself as an improviser developing in the next 10 years?
We always develop, and we always grow, and we always learn. And I think this is something I mentioned earlier in this interview. And it is important for me to keep finding new challenges. And luckily, there are a lot of those, a lot of things that I want to learn to do better, and a lot of things that I want to develop that I haven't developed in the past. But let's go back first to the previous question. With relation to 10 years ago, what I'm doing today, I have a lot more experience. So 10 years ago, that was before so many things. I started teaching improvisation in 2006, and then 10 years ago, I had very little experience, and I started doing some things in concert, but I was working intuitively, and today I know so much more about how to practice improvisation. So I've done a lot of different styles, and I've done a lot of different projects, and when I have a new project and I get started, I start from earlier experiences and earlier memories that I have, and I can turn back the page in my notebook and look at things that I wrote the last time I worked on something, and then I say, okay, now can I take it to the next level? So I would say that the main difference is just having more experience. And 10 years from now, I don't know if I can mention specific targets, but I would just like to do more collaborations, to get to know more artists from different disciplines, and to be surprised every day from the things that I can learn also from other people, and the things that I can learn from my own practicing. And I don't want to set specific goals, because then later you can, I don't know, then you are tied to them. I think more in terms of each new day as a new adventure, and each new day, each new day is a day of creating music. And what can we create today? What can we do today? And of course, there are the current projects that I'm working on right now. So those occupy my mind. And then when I finish those projects, then I move on to the next. But I think one of the wonderful things in music is that you can create until a very old age. You mentioned earlier Milton Babbitt, and there was also Elliott Carter, a composer who died past
in his 90s.
100.
Oh, hundreds. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, 103. So you can always be creative in music, and you can always keep doing it. And I think we are fortunate that we can spend time making music. This should not be taken for granted. There are so many problems in the world. We are now in the midst of the corona crisis, and there are wars, and there is hatred and violence, and and so many problems in the world that we don't even need to get into. But just to be able to make music, and to be able to get up in the morning and to do my daily exercise, yoga, and some running, and to get some fresh air and fresh mind, and to make music on my own, and make music with my colleagues and with my children and with my students, and to just have this privilege to spend my life in music. So I think we should be grateful. I am grateful for every day that I can make music.
Beautifully put. Well, what can I say? It's been a real fantastic honor to have the great pianist and composer and Professor Noam Sivan. And he is the Professor of Piano Improvisation at the State University of Music and Performing Arts, Stuttgart. And Professor Sivan, how can people contact you if they want to have questions about your master's program in classical piano improvisation, or just improvisation in general? How can they reach out to you? And please also mention what projects you have coming up for the rest of the year.
So you can write to me on my website, noamsivanmusic.com. So this is easy. You can find me there, and everyone is welcome to contact me. In terms of projects, now with the Corona times, it's so everything is unpredictable.
Yeah.
So we never know what's happening tomorrow. A lot of concerts got canceled. A lot of things got postponed, and I don't know what to say. But I should mention I welcome everyone to check out the tone bass lectures. I think they just came out, and I'm happy with the product, with the result. These are 6 improvisation lessons, and then later on we will have more videos on tone bass. We mentioned the album Ambira's Journey. There is another album that will come out called Actors of the Mind. And there are, in terms of concerts, I cannot say, because those things get changed all the time. So I don't want to create false hopes, and it's so difficult to have concerts, live concerts these days. So we'll just say that when there are no concerts, we continue improvising on the internet.
Okay.
But there is this project I mentioned. There are some things I mentioned before. Penemunde Compassion with Yasuko Kozaki, the project exploring human violence. We are supposed to have performances coming up in several months. There are there is my ensemble here, and we have also we hope to have performances. I'm curating a concert of Jewish music at the Music University here in Stuttgart, Germany, as a Jewish composer today in Europe. So we're doing that, which is a nice project. There are a couple of other collaborations with colleagues, and yeah, there are always things I'm working on, but it's hard to know which ones will actually happen and which ones
Fingers
will
crossed,
not.
fingers crossed. That's fantastic. Well, Professor Sivan, thank you so much for being on the show. It was really an honor and a pleasure to talk to you. And I really hope you come back on, give me an update on your master's program. I really want to know how it's going. And I wish you all the best. I hope it grows and it's a seed for more programs and you inspire more people to be ambassadors for improvisation, because I think you're doing tremendous work. And so thank you very, very much. Have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Nikhil. Thank you.